everybody. I'm Pat Hobbs, and I'm here tonight at the Lynn Theater at Oklahomans for Equality, and it's the world premiere of More Sky, the story of Lynn Riggs. And I have with me tonight Gregory Hinton, the author, and Andy Couch from the Claremore Museum of History. So I want to ask a real quick question for you, Gregory.
Sure.
Tell me how you got started, and how did we come about writing More Sky?
You got me, but a couple years ago, I gave a talk at the Gilcrease Museum in 2018, and it was about the same time that the revival of Oklahoma started making a lot of news. And it was through a New York Times article that I came to know the story of Lynn Riggs, who, as everyone knows, is the playwright of Greenville the Lilacs, which Rogers and Hammerstein based Oklahoma on. So I came here intending to research something else, and I drove to this fellow's museum, that's right, Claremore Museum of History, and he opened up the whole world of Lynn Riggs to me. It's just been a wonderful partnership we've had, and that you all and I have had, and the idea of writing a solo play or a one-man play about Lynn Riggs came up, and I jumped at the opportunity.
Well, great.
Here we go.
Wonderful. And Andy is with the Claremore Museum. Now tell us about what we've been able to share over the last 6 or 8 months.
For sure. Just partnering with the Equality Center and Gregory here has been great because we've been able to dive into our collections. And because of all of this, I mean, we've really been able to focus in on things that have really never seen the light of day. These have been in Riggs family home, or these have been in our archive, and now we're talking about them. There's a lot more people interested in Lynn, just due to everything that's been going on.
Yeah. So. Well, you know, Lynn Riggs is one of Oklahoma's unsung heroes in my book. I didn't know too much about him. I knew that he wrote, the predecessor to Oklahoma, and I knew he was from Claremore, but that was about all I ever knew. And having him come to life on stage now in More Sky has just been a real eye-opener for me. And going over to the museum, if you'll notice on set in some of the pictures you're going to see later on as we film this, the pictures that we got from your archives, the Joan Crawford pics, the Betty Davis pictures, and a lot of that stuff. Thank you so much for being able to give us these.
No, anytime. Yeah, I'm glad we were able to put them to great use, and I can't wait for everyone to see it. So.
Yeah.
What I'm so happy about More Sky is it's been the pairing of theater with museums and historical archives. Courtesy of Andy, we have the collections of Yale's Beinecke Library, a lot of Lynn's personal letters and correspondence, Harvard's Houghton Library, of course the University of Oklahoma Western's collections, and also Tulsa University's special collections. So this is a true partnership with history. It's history meets theater, and couldn't be a greater guidance.
Well, it's great. Thanks for joining us, and I want to give thanks to Andy Couch again, and of course Gregory. Thank you so much for joining us here. Thanks everybody.
Letters can be very vicious things. You cute little bum, you're really up to some deviltry. I see it all. We never spoke of it. A theater must be created to utilize people, not to make. Oklahoma. Based on the play, Greenville the Lilacs by Lynn Riggs. No, not damn it. I'm glad. Vagabonds, adventurers, daredevils, fools. Whether he's welcome or not, a writer needs to come home to his farmhouse. To become an artist. This is to be a lyric theater. And if it is so truly, the stage hands will know it as well as the rest of us. We will look back later on and say, if someone had told
bought this toy theater at the Paris flea market in 1929. I was at the tail end of a Guggenheim Fellowship and looking for a souvenir. It has marvelous detail. Electric lights, look at this. 2 rows of electric lights. It's got moving parts. The set can be raised and lowered. And there's little cutout figures that you can move around in the grooves. And this is Curly and Lori, their first kiss. Do you know I block all of my scenes with this theater? All of them. Kids, really everybody teases me that this was the dollhouse that I was never allowed. But as I have learned, even a toy theater, no matter how small, is nothing to be toyed with. Rebel, where's my doggy? Come here, doggy. Come on, Rebel. We've got company. Come here, buddy. I don't know where's Rebel. Where's Rebel? Okay, that's all right. What have I gotten myself into? So, it's hard enough to organize a drawer, right? Much less your whole life. I mean, what do you keep? What do you throw away? So you pull out one letter, you read it, it brings back memories, catapults you like a clown out of a cannon into the 3-ring circus that's your past. And then by the time you come to, well, it's cocktail hour. And you've accomplished nothing. Well, I intend to drink all day. My agent said that she's going to send her secretary over to organize my papers. But I said, I have to organize my papers in order for her to come and organize my papers, right? So as you can see, I've made a little bit of headway. I've got the papers of Lynn Riggs, manuscripts, journals, scrapbooks, and she's certain that some sooner archive will want them sooner or later. And she says that they pay for such things. So these are the last of the letters to be filed. And I just want to read them one more time before I let them go. Some of them are deeply, deeply personal, and they will probably be restricted long after I'm gone. So, thank you so much for being here. Thank you. Thank you for keeping me company. You don't have to do anything. Just sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. So, now, let me give you a tour, right? So, this beautiful bar over here was a gift from Joan Crawford. Anybody know Joan Crawford? No? We nicknamed it after her. And at my house, drinks are always on Joan. So feel free, help yourself. If you want a drink, you come right up here and fix yourself. Or you can wait until intermission and then go. But it's about time for my Pepto toddy. Now, he overate and he overdrank, but then the next morning, he was fine. And now we know why. It was Pepto-Bismol with a shot or 2 or 3 of vodka. And it's better if you let it breathe. Now, this is a picture of my sister Maddie and me. This is in Claremore, 1908. And this is me and Joan Crawford here. This is Francho on their wedding day in 1935. How did that happen? So the drum up here, this was a gift from the governor of Oklahoma. On the Oklahoma City premiere of Oklahoma. And it's probably the only tribal artifact associated with the play Oklahoma, on stage or off. Now, Lynn, be nice. A self-portrait, always a work in progress, right? I'm a Sunday painter. Enrique has all the talent. Dances, paints, writes, and he is no longer with us. My security blanket, Maddie made it for me years ago. Other than Rebel, my old Smith Corona, and my old guitar over here, Maddie's quilt always travels with me. I like to show it off to my visitors. And if they don't get it, or if they make fun a little bit, then they're not invited back. Crawford got it. Born Lucille Fay LeSueur in San Antonio. Like me, Joan's roots are deeply Southwest. She hates condescension, and that's why we're buddies. Not that we don't love glamour, because we do, but we also know that it ain't everything. Oh, heck, it's fraying. Oh no. I'll have to get Maddie to fix it for me. So, welcome to my farmhouse. A writer is born in a farmhouse, leaves a farmhouse, and does nothing for the rest of his life but write about a farmhouse. And then in some cases, a writer comes home to the farmhouse to die. This farmhouse is a dream, solid all year long. It's got trees, locusts and apples, shrubbery, lawns, strawberries and raspberries. It's the farmhouse that Oklahoma built. And it looks out to the sea. It's quite ravishing. Rebel loves the beach. Don't you let him! Don't you let him! I still don't know where he is. He'll turn up later. But you know, a view is not unlike a theater, right? Look at me. Look at me, right? It will not be ignored. And one thing that I did not anticipate to my peril is it's difficult to get anything done with a needy view around. You must sit by the sea during your visit. I'll mow, you watch the bees in the hydrangeas. So, by now, you have probably figured out that I am somehow associated with the sensational Rodgers and Hammerstein musical Oklahoma. Oklahoma is my old play, Green Grow the Lilacs in a New Dress. I am delighted by its success. As I recently wrote Oscar in a letter, Oklahoma is singing still and still green and still spring. I sent him a new concept for a musical, and in a note back, he said to me that he and Dick are a little overcommitted to more production plans than they can handle, and I would not want to add your play to a list that is already too long. We wish you the best of luck with this, Lynn. Oklahoma. It was their first collaboration, and over half of it is still me. And I'll admit to counting the lines, if you'll forgive me for hoping that I might have been asked to come along for the ride. As a younger man, I wondered if irate Oklahomans, after my plays were published in all their fever and horror and brashness and lewdness and all things that accumulate and throw their shadows over the inner gentility and fragility that is at their core. Of course, in Oklahoma, Rodgers and Hammerstein would soften these edges a little bit. Oh, what a beautiful morning, capitalized on my own stage direction in the opening of Green Grow the Lilacs. A radiant summer morning when a rich male voice begins to sing. There's a bright morning haze on the meadow. I sing way better when I'm sober. There's a bright morning haze on the meadow. The corn is as high as an elephant's eye, and it looks like it's climbing clear up to the sky. Oh, hell. Who ever heard of a musical theater trio, anyway? Rogers, Hammerstein, and Riggs? Anyway, it's been suggested that I have poetically idealized the speech of my fellow Oklahomans, most notably in the person of Aunt Eller, but the aunt who unwittingly sat for her naturally spoke a much more highly charged and poetic language than I could ever connive to write in her vein. Well, ain't you a pair of pretty nothings? I sitting there picking away at knot holes, the pair of old pistols, and they're scaring everybody to death. She was a delight to listen to, really, she was. From morning to night, she will comment on the affairs of the household, the state of the weather, the goings-on of the neighbors, and in a language which would gladden the heart of any poet who loves apt and spontaneous word images. And this was generally true of all the Oklahoma folk of 30 years ago whom I have written about. There, people talked poetry without any conscious effort to make beautiful language, but in an effort to make their meaning vivid. Because of the external poverty and the sameness and the lack of variety in their lives, they felt the need of richness and variety in their thoughts. Besides, they all had something of the actor in them. Not that they performed false parts, but when they spoke, they made a definite effort to put themselves, as one might say, over the footlights to dramatize their meaning and their personality. I let my characters write their own speeches in a language which was familiar to my boyhood ears. Whatever poetry may be found in my plays is to the credit of my neighbors, not myself. I'm often asked who I base my characters on, and like many of my fans, Marion here wonders if the folks in Oklahoma were real people. A carbon copy of my reply. Dear Marion, I rarely answer such questions as you have asked, but for you, I'd like to try. Aunt Eller is based on my wonderful Aunt Mary, and some of the things that I vaguely knew about my mother, who died when I was 2. Her name also was Ella, or Eller, as people called her, but I never actually knew her. Laurie was my cousin Laura Thompson. She was glowing and lovely and made a deep and tender impression on me. Curly was a cowboy who used to work for my aunt. These for starters. So by now, she's probably sold the original. And by the way, Marion, writers often base our stories and characters on places and people, and just long after we've gone and left them behind. And what can I say? I mean, writers memorialize. We enact revenge. Truthfully, a little bit of both. And sometimes our characters or characterizations repeat time after time throughout the body of our collected works. Aunt Mary made it into several of my plays. She loved it. The same can't be said for my stepmother, Juliet. Juliet, a graduate of the Cherokee Female Seminary at Tahlequah. This is her. Just after she married my father, and the brood she inherited. As you can see, she was quite young and somewhat striking. That's me she's holding here. She's wild-eyed and would never look happier. But her resentment towards me was visceral. And to this day, I don't know why. To keep the peace, my father moved us into town, dispatching me across the street to Aunt Mary's, already raising 8 kids. One more kid made no difference to her. And sometimes we were left in the care of our gentle Uncle Jimmy. He was a bachelor who ran the St. James Hotel. On warm summer nights, Jimmy hammered out old songs on his dulcimer and taught all of us children how to sing and to dance. Peripatetic rail hands would join us on the porch and teach us folk songs from all over the world. These were formative moments for me. My favorite song was The Miner Boy. I ran right home to sing it for Juliet, hoping that she might like me more. One morning as I rambled o'er the fields, I took my way in hopes of meeting my miner boy, and for a while to stray. And Juliet locked me in the smokehouse. She said, nobody likes their boys like you. I was crushed. She'd said nothing about my singing. So to win her back, I wailed after her, my miner boy, my hope, my joy, my own. My heart was blessed, I can find no rest for thoughts of my miner boy. Juliet would go on to inspire wicked stepmothers in 3 of my plays. It helps a writer to model a character after a loved one or a despised one. And by the time you've established them and you have every intention of changing their names, well, Marion, sometimes you just don't. For Big Lake, my first successful drama, I named the character Betty, but I didn't reveal that to the real Betty until the play was a done deal. Betty was an old friend of mine from Norman, Betty Kirk, one of my oldest gal pals. Betty was the younger sister of a friend at OU named Darwin. We called him Dokie. And Betty and I loved to go dancing. And so years later, I wrote to her, Betty, I hope you don't mind. I've stolen your name and put it on a very blonde, pale, delicate flower of the backwoods, who is a little too fragile for the world and finally drowns herself in the lake. You know, folks ought to be flattered to be remembered at all, don't you think? I'm a riding old painting to leave no dam. Going to Montana, I'm gonna throw a hula hand. The feet in the coolies and the water in the draw. Their tails are all matted and their backs are all gone. Punching cows, be good for you. Man you up. I was born Raleigh Lynn Riggs in Claremore, Indian Territory, before Oklahoma was even a state. That's 20 years after Will Rogers, Claremore's other favorite son, and about 20 years before Patty Page, Claremore's favorite daughter. You can't get more American than that, right? So my father, William Riggs, was a rancher, old Appalachian stock. My mother was a Cherokee, Ella Buster. Her family, courtesy of Andrew Jackson, were driven out of the Carolinas on their own trail of tears. When I was 1, Rosie enrolled herself, my sister Maddie, and me, Raleigh Lynn, in the Cherokee tribe. Rosie received 160 acres in the Dawes allotment. So that is when Congress abolished tribal land ownership, which was in 1887. And many tribal women were swindled, and some were even murdered for their allotments. And when my mother, Rosie, passed away 2 years later from typhus, well, her allotment was divided between the 3 of us, naming Bill Riggs, our designated guardian. My dad had very little interest in me. I wasn't like my rugged cowboy brothers. I was a frail child. I'm told that the loss of Rosie caused an attachment to appear much later in life, an early mother complex, they say. resulting in 3 nervous breakdowns in my lifetime so far. But I enjoyed school. I loved it. And I wanted to go to college. And although he could have afforded to send me, my dad refused to pay, assuming that I was going to run the ranch. So before I worked summers as a cattle hand, I grew very well versed in handling cattle. And so I signed on as a cow puncher on a cattle train to Chicago, thinking Bill Riggs might relent about supporting my studies. I was wrong. And it occurred to me, maybe he might be ashamed of me. Maybe he was happy to see me go. His last words, "Man you up." Rest assured, it did not. And days later, loading out up in Mud City's Union stock cars, I discovered that variegated among the cattle were panicking burro and deer, heartbroken for having been swept up and driven out of Oklahoma against their will. Ride around, you little doggies, ride around slow, for the fire and the snuff, they are raring to go. In Chicago, I kicked around at odd jobs before heading to New York. I clerked at Macy's. I read copy for the Wall Street Journal. And on Sundays, standing room only, I caught every play that my limited funds and time allowed. And my ranching experience paid off. I hired on as a background cowboy in silent films. Hopping a freight to Hollywood, I traded in my chefs for a tuxedo. I was a dress suit extra in Rudolph Valentino's very first film. An extra learns very quickly how best to use his time while he waits. I watched and I learned. The deco set design, the film noir lighting, the bargain directors and the bullying producers and the beleaguered team of writers struggling to make a scene work. And as a sideline, I proofed copy for the LA Times. A windfall of an article I wrote afforded me a return ticket, coach, not freight, to Claremore on a map, equidistant between New York and California. I identified my options, and to better arm my future, at the age of 20, I enrolled as a freshman at the University of Oklahoma. And this I underwrote with a mortgage from my land allotment. I didn't need Bill Riggs' money. Thank you very much, Roseller. Man you up. So there I was, living in some damp basement in Norman, washing dishes for the Pi Kappa Alpha fraternity. I did this in exchange for room and board. And then I made a new friend, Joe Benton. He was also a pledge. And Joe was the director of the Glee Club, and I was his secretary. Taking pity on me, Joe invited me to dinner at his family home. And Joe's mother, who had buried 2 sons, took me in. From my basement squalor, I moved into a beautiful corner bedroom on the 2nd floor with all the amenities. So, you might be asking yourselves, who travels to Chicago, New York, and then finally Hollywood, but comes back to Norman to fulfill his childhood dream of a diploma from OU? What did Oklahoma offer that could improve on the promise of both coasts? Born in Indian Territory before Oklahoma was even a state, I wondered how Oklahoma I really was. I still do today. The governor's drum notwithstanding, who I am continues to feel like a disparate combination of mutually exclusive attributes which I still struggle to accept within myself. But I was fortunate. When I matriculated to OU, the university was a rapidly developing intellectual center. And there I hoped to figure things out. I threw myself into my studies. I loved participating in campus life. I never missed a dance or a football game. In addition to the Glee Club, I joined the Honorary Drama Fraternity, the Blue Pencil, the Literary Society, and with Joe as my sponsor, I pledged his house. Me, a pike. I also secured a position as a paid teaching assistant. My principal advisor was Walter Campbell, and he and his wife Isabel used to hold these fabulous salons in their home. And we were encouraged to read and discuss each other's work. And so during this time, this is when I discovered poetry, and I wrote reams of bad verse. Walter brought the respected poet Whitter Benner to lecture at OU. Hal expressed admiration for my poetry. See, when Hal submitted his own poems, he often submitted poems from students as well. H.L. Mencken published me, as did the poetry anthology Smart Set. And my first play, Cuckoo, got hilariously produced. I got bit by the writer's bug really bad. And the summer before my junior year, Joe Benton and I toured with the Singer Quartet for the Midland Chautauqua Company. And we shared a hotel room. Joe had to learn to sleep with the lights on because most nights I scribbled observations in a journal to later pepper my correspondence to folks at home. I reported on meeting the author Willa Cather in Red Cloud, and I wrote a sketch on the beloved Chautauqua fortune teller, Mother Lake, for an anthology, Someone to Remember. Where's that letter from Betty? There you go, Betty. So I'm surprised that after finding your career, you didn't stay with it. What pray is the matter with being a chorus girl? We've crossed the Mississippi so many times, our biggest problem is trying to remember what state we're in. I'm strong for Oklahoma, and if you would write and tell me what you're doing, I'd be tickled approximately pink. My senior year, I penned a raven-haired girl named Eileen. I met her in the Blue Pencil Society. And in homage to the glamorous female characters of a favorite novelist, I called her my Hergesheimer woman. Eileen was voted second most beautiful girl at OU. I finally had it all, or at least second best. But not long after that, Eileen eloped with a rich, handsome boy and drove out of Norman in his red Stutz Bearcat Roadster. Now, during this same time, Joe Benton left Oklahoma to study opera in Nice. Now, Joe's is a fascinating story. In my journal, right over there, under a few things that have interested me right after Hamlet, is Joe Benton. Joe went on to become Giuseppe Bentinelli, the great Italian tenor. And he sang for the New York Metropolitan Opera. Benton, Bentinelli. And they bought it. In my journal, I wrote, the irony and how American. But with Eileen gone and with Joe gone, my world collapsed. I wrote to Walter in this postcard from Claremore. Dear Walter, doctor advises my not coming back to school next term. I dropped out of OU 1 semester before I was to graduate. And I never went back. Say, maybe it's time for another drink on the show. Now, there is some confusion about the reasons for my sudden departure from Norman. It has been speculated that I had consumption. Hal speculated severe melancholia, and a few jealous enemies conjectured the possibility of a scandal. I wrote Hal from Claremore. I am in a snowdrift, literally and metaphorically. Please don't worry about helping me. You have done that. The forces of earth rise to crush the weak things, the tortoise without a shell. This latter complication, which you should know about, dear Hal, would have been little difficulty had there not been earlier unresolved ones. This town is beautiful, and it's brutal, and it's lovely, and it's unlovely. The sky is the only thing that's here. Hal would later publicly disclose his homosexuality in a poem long before such things were done. And it caused a sensation. It was generally believed that the shock of Eileen's desertion wounded me so deeply that I never again fell wholly in love with any other woman. And I admit that I have made no attempt to disabuse anyone of that notion. I have found it very useful. And in fairness, I wanted to believe that Eileen might be the one. She was a bright, sweet girl. She was gorgeous and funny, the first of many great female talents. She set the standard. I mean, you might actually say that Joan was a gift from Eileen, because women trust me. Eileen's departure distracted everyone from the fact that Joe Benton left Norman at this exact same time. And I don't think that Joe even knew how distressed I was, and I'm really glad of that. And we who part must do so casually, lest we betray too much of what it means, renouncing home to go away. Betty once said that I was a homeless person who loved the warmth of a fireside and a home. Joe and his family gave me that. I never really had a real home in Claremore, and perhaps never thought that I deserved one. Hal had a home in New Mexico and suggested that the clear mountain air might do me some good. And as he later observed, I showed up at the door with some poems. Dear Walter and Mrs. Walter, Sunmount, where I'm staying, is half sanatorium, half hotel. They make everyone feel at home. I'm getting so damn healthy, it's disgusting. I've done some new work, and Hal wants me to write a whole series on Santa Fe. Lungers who came to heal and stayed to paint. So there I found myself, physically and emotionally beaten down, driven out of Oklahoma for the second time in 5 years, only to find cure in the company of scribes. My fellow resident was the editor of Poetry magazine, and he brought renowned poets to recite. In addition to concerts and lectures, Sunmount arranged for horseback rides and excursions to nearby pueblos. I have just come from a long drive through the country with Miss McKittrick, the secretary of the New Mexico Indian Association. We visited the Tesuque Pueblo, where we met the governor. The Pueblo life must be wonderful, the real communal life. And to think of how they are being contaminated by the damn whites. Santa Fe really isn't like a book. There's no ending, happy or otherwise, and there is no possible way of getting that gorgeous country Looking back, it was in the faraway and the nearby of Georgia O'Keeffe's lavender hills and black places that I seemingly escaped infection from that damnable disease, the disease of despair. I confess to being utterly done up spiritually when I left Norman. Well, now I had been vaccinated, as it were, and was quite safely over it. But in Santa Fe, there's also the altitude. Everything is blamed on the altitude by the newcomers. And after Sunmount, I worked on a farm in town along the river. I took care of chickens, and I lived in the chicken house. I had a little alcove and a bed and a washstand and a long, low table that was dusted with chicken feed, and there were 3 small doors that were right there and opened directly into the roosts. The poet thought it absolutely beautiful. Santa Fe in the 20s was relaxed and informal. We penniless poets were very often invited to cafes out in the plaza or dinners in beautiful adobe homes. Long gray ponytails and turquoise armor served as the requisite uniform for the better hostesses of Santa Fe, whom I tried to emulate. There were no class distinctions. That's how we got along. I joined a literary group. We called ourselves the Rabble, and we were ruthlessly honest with each other's work. The ruder the comments were, the harder we laughed. But I, the youngest and clearly a pretender, learned a great deal. They taught me how to defend my work, and that is something they don't teach you in creative writing classes. And in addition to celebrated poets and artists, I met established theater people from the East and talented film people from the West who remain friends to this day. And then later, I directed a film, A Day in Santa Fe. And then the dialect in my early plays portended green grow the lilacs, and ultimately, Oklahoma. I left Santa Fe the following year to go to Chicago for a teaching position, and this is where I wrote Big Lake, then my first produced New York play, and everything started to fall into place. A relationship with the theatrical publisher Samuel French, an arts residency at the first session of Yaddo, and then this. Mr. Riggs is respectfully recommended by the John Simon Guggenheim Foundation as a distinguished American student to the esteem, confidence, and friendly consideration of all persons to whom he may present this letter. The first Oklahoman to get one. The Guggenheim solved my future for a year, or arguably it solved my future. So, believing that the knowledge of the European theater would be helpful to a dramatist, I decided that a year abroad might be a station from which the American life that I know might be more penetratingly viewed. I hope to settle down somewhere in France and write a new play about Middle Western American life. When Maddie asked, why don't you just stay home to write about home? I told her somewhat sharply that I don't need to be in Oklahoma to write about Oklahoma. And just when I thought that I was no good and might as well just go jump in the river, I learned that Barrett Clark of Samuel French named me, Eugene O'Neill, and Paul Green the equals of any European dramatist. So there I was, chain smoking between shots of espresso and shots of absinthe. La fille verte, the green fairy. So I wrote Barrett from my regular bistro table at Le Dumanon. I ought to be feeling assured, leisurely poised, and more energetic than ever in my life, but it has remained for Paris to reduce me slowly to a sort of amoeba-like state. Alive, but not much else. The reason for this is not Paris, much maligned place, but the fact that when I came, I was tired out. had written 3 plays the preceding year. The Schuberts had optioned the Domino Parlor, which at the time seemed like a dream come true. But then they tried to change my structure, and they started to alter my words. The disgusting burden of the tryout of the play just about finished me. God slay me if I ever have to stand around and yes, dumb actors, and mix with the swine of the theater ever again. They never suffer for their defections and pretenses, and it seems that I do nothing else. So Green Grow the Lilacs, my new play, was the most ambitious I had tried. And I hoped that it would be my best. A play about a vanished era in the Middle West. An era a little more golden than the present one. A time when people were easier, warmer, happier in the environment that they created. Song flourished. And there were the usual human anguishes, of course, but there was a wholeness in the people. There was a great endurance. And in spite of all the ignorances and darknesses, there was a cool wisdom that our radios and autos have banished forever. In this play, I was showing for the first time in drama many American folk songs entirely unknown to the world, even in anthologies. My intent was to solely recapture in a kind of nostalgic glow the great range of mood which characterized the old folk songs and the ballads that I used to hear in my Oklahoma childhood. Their quaintness, their sadness, their robustness, their simplicity, their heartier body humors and their sentimentalities, their melodrama and their sweetness. It seemed wise to me to throw away the conventions of ordinary theater, which is basically a complex plot, swift action, and try to inhabit luminously, in the simplest of stories, a wide area of mood and feeling. In my beliefs, anyway, I found ran counter to the current notions about it. 2 people in a room agreeing or not agreeing were, to me, truly dramatic. This flow may be violent, it may be comic or tender, it may be one-sided, subtle, maddeningly recluse. And the dramatist, it seemed to me, had no business to interfere just for the sake of making a play in its present and idiotic meaning. That he may be tempted to do so was lamentable. But if he took his work seriously, he would face problems in a limbo beyond the knowledge of applause. His role would be continued humility and abnegation. And sometime his characters might do stirring things that he never could have calculated. And sometime, if he was fortunate, he might hear people he has set in motion, as Shakespeare and Chekhov often heard, say things to astonish him and make him wise. I wished I was writing a play about twilight or yellow radiance after rain, or more sky. There's verity in little else. I soon left Paris, I left for the warmth of the south of France, and it much, much revived me. I vowed to myself and anyone who would listen that I would not have my play mangled if I never got it produced. I hated the idea, but I would have to be around if this play ever went into rehearsal, on the count of the songs and the dialect, and what was even more important, the rhythms of the speech. Broadway's ideas of this special speech would be pretty awful. So I had a sinking, sick feeling that I didn't want to go inside a theater ever again. I really hated it more and more. I'm getting quite content here, where one can fly off to watch the poor wretches trying to amuse themselves at Cannes and Nice and Monte Carlo when the spirit says so. I'm in a 13th century village near all the places of tired gaiety. My life was incredibly simple in those days. I'd go on sitting at the breakfast table while the maid puttered about and began working. I went for 3 days to Toulon and watched the town busy doing nothing on its curious and intimate way. C.H. Lawrence was there, but he was everywhere. And then I had really the most healthy and happy winter that I had had in years, and I was writing my best play. And luckily, since spring was definitely upon us, the warm hillsides were so alluring, and I was so tired, but I was happy. After some rest, I had plans for work popping right and left. And of Green Grow the Lilacs, I didn't see how anybody but the newest and most careful, poetic kind of producer could touch it. And that kind of person, that's the only kind of person that would have any hopes of being even allowed to produce it. I knew that no hurried production, of mine anyway, would show anything but a disgusting mess. And so unshowy and poetic of a piece that Green Grow the Lilacs was would yield nothing but pain for me, a baffled audience, and a general air of lack of skill if it ever got casually or presented in hurriedly fashion. I insisted on nothing being changed, not even a phrase without my written consent. I saw no point to be suicidally grateful to anyone for doing a play which many people would be glad to do and pay for doing. What about the songs? Dear Barrett, this is a farewell letter, for be it known, I'm sailing for New York, and I'm bringing home the perfect souvenir, a toy theater, to remind me not to take myself so damn serious. It was a positive thing. I'd had a good year with Green Grow the Lilacs. Finished and forgotten much of France, seen and known, the Riviera coast unforgettable in my mind, and a new play, The Cherokee Night, fermenting rapidly, and a faint homesickness began to stir. Yes, I was completely American after all. Though after my quiet life, I was sure New York would probably knock me down and trample all over me. And I kept thinking, maybe I should be on a farm this summer. I promised to bend my energies toward making that possible. And anyway, I suppose that I ought to be back in America, after all. So let me reiterate how terribly grateful I am. I'm so afraid that all my talk about it has made Green Grow the Lilacs sound pretentious and grand, when as a matter of fact, it's the simplest kind of story about a boy and a girl, and a life that has passed away. No one has done the cowboy correctly yet. His romantic dash, his drollness, his humor, his childishness, his stupidity, and his charm. Curly is the only step in that direction in American fiction. So where was I? With 3 contracts in my pocket, when I came abroad, I had no productions. Just where was I? But I had a new play, and maybe that was something. Rebel? Oh no, doggy. Where's Rebel? Rebel got himself clocked by a wave, didn't you, buddy? Rebel, oh no. Daddy'll take care of you. Daddy'll take care of you. Now don't shake off, Rebel. Not on Joan. Not on Joan, Rebel. Oh, doggy, stay. Rebel, he loves the beach. So, where were we? Oh, when I returned from Europe, I wrote my friend, the playwright Paul Green, with very good news. Green Grow the Lilacs, my first poem for the theater, had gotten some attention, and the Theater Guild had taken a $100 option until September. Now that the Theater Guild was interested, I sent word that I would be glad to confer with the producers, Teresa Helborn and Lawrence Langer, to hear their feelings about the play. And I promised to do everything in my power to help the Indian Territory of 1900 come alive in its own particular luster. And soon they wrote that the cast was starting to come together and that Clark Gable was in the running with Francho Tone for the part of Curly, our cowboy. Imagine, the Theater Guild was all in. The nightmare of my brightest and most delicate baby, fallen into the hands of a child-snatching producer, abated. And so, on opening night, I skipped town. I went down to see my friend Paul, who was teaching in Chapel Hill. But friends wired the next morning with good news. The papers, the New York Times. At last, excitement in the theater season, tender quaintness, ready simplicity, native salt, honest illusion of American soil. No question, Mr. Riggs' play is the only logical candidate for this year's Pulitzer Prize. Green grow the lilacs, all sparkling with you. How long live my darling since parting with you? And by the next week, I'll hope to prove true and change the green lilacs to the red, white, and blue. We played 6 months. In those days, that was a success, though some disagree. The Pulitzer, however, ultimately went to a drama about Emily Dickinson. I was in Tulsa when I heard, and it stung. I'll admit, I thought it was mean of fate for me to be in Oklahoma when the announcement was made. And that very day, I was at a luncheon in my honor, and a local journalist asked me for a quote. I tried to be polite, but it would have been wonderful for me, for my stature with my father, the people of my state. And of course, such recognition is always helpful to my career. But wouldn't you know, in the following days, Hollywood, Pathé Studios, to be exact, telephoned with me an offer to come out for 6 weeks to do a talkie. This was the first letter that I wrote from California. I'm liking it out here so far. The Pathé people are giving me a free hand, and they like what I'm doing. I dined with Gloria Swanson and her agent. Miss Swanson is quite marvelous in many ways, and she may want me to do her story. Might change her mind. Wayward impulses afflict the Hollywood air. I had left New York to come out and make the talkies safe for art. And I noticed a gradual change in the tone of my Hollywood spirit. A curious thing happens. Out there, Broadway, which we all despise here, becomes a sainted virgin, the final Mecca of all that is brilliant, beautiful, and divine in drama. I'd hardened to the New York theater. I thought I knew what I was doing. And in Hollywood, it would be perfectly easy to go on making the kind of drama that I believe in. And while Green Grove the Lilacs was touring the country, the Cherokee Night offered my first opportunity to dramatize the tightrope one walks as an absorbed Cherokee. As welcome as the allotment act might have been for Roseller, blood quantum was the test to receive it, underscoring the prevailing obsession about how much Cherokee blood was required in order to receive tribal benefits. Full blood, 3/4, 1/2, 1/4, 1/8, 1/16. And sometimes the allotment insisted on paperwork from ancestors which never existed, all as a ruse to deny many their due. To the Cherokee, kinship is the only arbiter. These arbitrary delineations were designed to divide us and to instill self-doubt. They are white arrows flung at the heart of our self-worth, ruinous to the self-esteem of indigenous children. The flip side of pride is shame. I am Cherokee, pure as I am. What delighted me about the Cherokee Night was that finally, by projection, the play had meaning beyond the story, even beyond the theme. I hoped it would be my best play. The title came from the Cherokee, "The grass is withered, where the river was is red sand, fire eats the timber, night has come to our people." And yet this, from Bruce Atkinson of the New York Times. Let this column state categorically that Mr. Riggs' principle is one of the worst by which a play can be written. It gives a muddled mind the authority to become an artist. The playwright is always right. If a play seems to have the merit to make production a fact, the author should have the final word on interpretation. He alone, and not the director, and not the producer, and not any actor, knows the exact shade of meaning that he intends. Past experiences with doctoring have convinced the Oklahoman that he is correct. He believes that the day of the poet in the theater is dawning, and that realism, as the stage has known it for the last few years, is dead. Being a poet, he feels none too kindly toward a restricted Broadway theater, even at its best, a real estate enterprise. People in the highways and byways are hungering for a theater that Broadway can neither practically nor philosophically supply. Decentralization of the theater is the answer, and it will surely come. Oh, I am in the throes of the most profound depression concerning the state of drama. Its state is lousy. The drama has been deteriorating since Shakespeare's time. Then, its exponents were passionately concerned with life. But now, it would seem that they're not concerned with life at all. Passion, honesty, truth, and glamour have been lost in straining after smartness. after the commercial thing. There's evidence beginning of a trend towards something better. I saw unblushingly that unless the drama does something for the soul of man, it isn't justifying itself. But was I any better? I'm a long time answering your nice note. Please forgive me. I've gone to Hollywood to do dialogue for the Garden of Allah. The picture is one of those $1 million affairs directed by my friend Boleslavsky, with Marlene Dietrich, Charles Bouillet, Basil Rathbone, and the picture will be released in the early fall. It is the best Technicolor I have ever seen. Dietrich, the bitch, is sometimes ravishing. Bouillet, at least in the rushes, is superb. It can be fairly stated that despite my misgivings, I had gone Hollywood in the eyes of my oldest and dearest friends. Good and steady money can be very persuasive. My outward appearance began to change. For the first time, I could afford beautiful clothes and more than one pair of loafers. I became fixated on my health. I ran, I swam, I lightened my hair, and then my Christmas list, which I meticulously prepared and budgeted for, always started with Sister Maddie. But that year, included on the same list, Maddie was followed by books for Joan Crawford, brandy glasses for Beulah Bondi, and a $5 quart of champagne for Betty Davis. La Davis and I became pals, and we remained pals through the years. The columns tried to link us romantically. Luckily, she laughed when the Hollywood Reporter observed that she was quietly keeping company with a very modest and unassuming Lynn Riggs, and that we were ablaze. She sent this hilarious note. Lynn, darling, are you ablazing still? Have you read what luck I had with a human bondage? Unbelievable. You made my decision. We'll always be grateful. Please come back soon. Betty. Oh, and yet this from Joan. Honey Lynn, when are you all coming home? Isn't that play finished? Please see the women. I'm so anxious to know what you think. Love, Joan. For anybody else, it would have been enough. There I was, in the pictures, making tons of money and giving advice to glamorous friends. I wondered if I was being dishonest with myself. And then I reported a ray of light. Gershwin wants me to do an opera with him. I'm trying to see what I can get in the way of a story for it. I flew to New York, where my old friend, Joe Benton, had arranged for us to have lunch as guests of George Gershwin. At the time, Porgy and Bess was enjoying resounding success. And over lunch, George and I discussed the possibility of collaborating on a folk opera in a similar vein. As Giuseppe Bentinelli, Joe was firmly established in his opera career, and I was in my drama and film writing endeavors. We had earned our place at the table. And I recall glancing up in the excitement of tossing out ideas and basking in Gershwin's glow, and catching Joe's gaze. He was beaming, and it evoked emotion in me, in both of us. After all, in little more than 10 years, we'd come quite a distance from the Southern minstrels and a long way from Norman, and for me, a long way from Indian territory. Joe had seen me at my worst. And when my father had sent me away from his home on a cattle train, Joe's mother had taken me in and made me a part of her family and put me up in the guest room. The Chautauqua tour brought us even closer. And then Joe went his way, and I went mine, with no way of telling how things might work out. And then there we were, at lunch with George Gershwin, composer of Rhapsody in Blue, an American in Paris, and Porgy and Bess. And under the table, Joe reached out and he took my hand. And he didn't let it go until we said our goodbyes. We never spoke of it. And then 2 years after our lunch with Gershwin, I got this telegram from Joe. The radio last evening and the papers this morning announced the death of George Gershwin. This will be a loss to you, I know, a great talent that has gone. Joe, if you can keep me, I want to stay here forever. And I'll be glad. And I knew then it was time to return to the red hills and bones of New Mexico, back to an artistic community where cash and status were not the arbiters of an honest creative life. I was on my way to Santa Fe to build myself an adobe house on the Sequel Madre. All I needed was a large room with a bath and a kitchen. And I sketched the floor plan on MGM letterhead. I envisioned myself on a sunny patio, writing a play, a few shades less than immortal. And then I explained it best, I think, in this letter to my dad. Dear Dad, I've built myself a house in Santa Fe. I'm writing to see if you'd be interested in loaning me $1,000. I want to get out of pictures at least until Christmas. And after a few months of freedom, I shall come back and make some more money again, but I'm pretty sick of them right now. Please let me know, Lynn. My father, who had doubted my ability to fend for myself, was proud of what I had accomplished. He and Juliet divorced. And over the years, he would visit Santa Fe with Minnie, who was his loving third wife. And since they enjoyed coming my way, I didn't go back to Claremore much at all. I kept in touch with my brothers, of course, but I was always closest to Sister Maddie. She worked so hard, and she was such a wonderful friend to me. I enjoyed her letters, and I actually sent her a monthly allowance whenever I was flush. Dear Lynn, was happy to hear from you last week. We are glad you like to quilt. It's a holiday in Tulsa. All the stores are closed. Today I've mowed the lawn, cleaned the house, and washed about a dozen garments. Hope I'll feel better in the morning. Love, Maddie. So I decided to take a trip to Mexico. There, I reacquainted with a very young writer and artist that I'd met years before in New York, Enrique Gasc Molina, from Mérida, Yucatan. And I decided to do everything in my power to bring him back to Santa Fe with me. Enrique wrote me the most wonderful letters. Letters I never ever dreamed that I would receive. And they were clever and funny and, yes, explicitly intimate. Dear Poopsie, what must you be doing now? Working, drinking, smoking? I know, having your carrot juice. You cute little bum, you're really up to some deviltry. I see it all. Now, let me tell you about the immigration visa first, baby. You are to send me an affidavit, a sworn affidavit, to the effect that you are willing to support me in case my ship does not come in. At any rate, before it does. Darling, I've been trying to think about you and me, and I can't. When do you suppose I'll stop missing you? This is worse than a circumcision. It even includes erections, but no one sends me flowers. I want you so terribly, you sweet thing. I'm tired of being so lonely, damn it. No, not damn it. I'm glad. Enrique. And I lobbied every influential friend and colleague to secure Enrique's future with me. Dear Paul, is it still possible to apply for a Rockefeller Dramatist Fellowship? I have a new candidate, Enrique Gask, who has written an extraordinary first play and needs the encouragement. He's a talented boy, it seems to me. Dear Hal, Enrique is ensconced in a studio and painting like mad. He's to have a show here and one in Hollywood. I want him to stay here as my guest as long as he wants to, and he wants very much to do so. How can anything be done to allow him not only to stay for another 6 months, but indefinitely? When Enrique moved to Santa Fe, of course I wanted to spend all of my time with him. He was young and clever and affectionate, and he was a very good influence on me. I stopped drinking and smoking. We were both working, me at my typewriter and him at his easel, and we traveled often. Drives to LA, flights to New York, burning through my savings. I added an upstairs studio because he needed his own workspace. Ultimately, my friends did not approve of Enrique, or perhaps they resented me for pulling away. Physically affectionate by nature, Enrique was open, completely uninhibited in public. I resisted him at first. We made others uncomfortable, but I wanted to spend every moment with him. He was so passionate, very amusing, extremely bright. Our friends were worried about me. The structure of my life completely changed. We turned into hermits, seeing very little of my closest and oldest friends. Yes, we started drinking, and then we went. And at that point, we even stopped writing and painting. And when I needed my friends the most, they shut me out. And I don't think that it was Hollywood or New York that rubbed them the wrong way. It was Enrique. It was me and Enrique that set their teeth on edge. And they made it known by not including him in any invitations to functions, a reading, a brunch, or even a hike. So of course I declined. I refused to allow them to try to divide us. It is a misnomer that artists and art colonies are inherently welcoming and inclusive. Simply put, there are limits. I've always been very serious in all of my associations with people. It was once observed by my friend Spud that if I liked someone, I loved that person. I wasn't interested in any casual associations. And if true, I'm proud of it. When Enrique arrived, I was determined that our friendship should not be tainted with this sort of social life which always exists in an art colony. It didn't make it any easier that Enrique wanted to push the envelope in public. He desperately hoped to meet my father. I want to be here to help you receive your dad and Minnie. I want to see them, and I want the two of them to see us together as is right and proper. I didn't have the courage, and that hurt him. After all, his parents loved me. Enrique had integrity. We parted for good. He returned to Merida. But I have many love letters from Enrique. They're important to my story and collectively to our history. Dearest Poochie, your letter nearly breaks my heart. About hating Santa Fe, I'm not thinking anymore about hating anything. I only know that I love and desire my rightful place beside my lover. I will understand that your darkness is as intense as mine and see your words in that guise. Some things you say are unnecessarily cruel, as your past telegrams have been. Letters can be very vicious things. I know more can be said and explained by holding you very tight and stroking your top knot and kissing your sweet, tired eyes for a little while. It is not easy to love. People go through life looking for it and never find it, and not even knowing that they're looking for it. And here we are, in full possession of it, and wanting to throw it away childishly for the lack of guts and strength. There is no excuse for our boorishness. I have sinned more than you, and I could offer a dozen valid excuses, but I notice that life accepts no excuses. I used to be afraid that I brought you bad luck in your affairs, because since your intimacy with me, things have not gone so well. But I know that that is silly, and you had bad luck and worse before you met me. Everybody has reversals, but not everybody has the thing that you and I have. We will look back later on and say, if someone had told us, Enrique. In 10 short years, the social life in Santa Fe had gotten much more complicated. It was very different from the way it was when I first arrived. In Santa Fe, there was no way that a brown, black, or red kid like me, minding chickens to make ends meet, would ever find himself invited to dinner at La Fonda. I resented the hell out of them for that. It was so wonderful before, and perhaps I did reject them only before they had a chance to reject me. So whatever happened to Enrique Gaspar? Well, his first play, Mexican Mural, was among the finalists for a group theater playwriting contest, and Enrique won. The runner-up, a New Orleans playwright by the name of Tennessee Williams, for American Blues. And since I had no work in Hollywood and was avoiding Santa Fe, I spent much more time in New York. I'd taken an apartment on Christopher Street, and I became passionate about a new kind of theater. Of course, I wrote Paul. Glad to hear news of new works in progress, particularly your concern for workers' theater. I look forward to your visit to New York and very much want to talk with you. I've renounced Hollywood too, I think, forever. When the interest rate became untenable, I defaulted on my intellectual mortgage to the studio system. I was now trying to establish a continuous, if not permanent, alliance with the theater. And things looked promising for me to do it. I had a great many discussions of the drama that winter, and we reached a few conclusions as to the nature of the theater that we could respect and belong to. We began to formulate, purely as if there were no obstacles, such a theater, and we called it the Vine. The poet in the theater of today is bound to be disgruntled with the way things are. He has no home, no place from where to operate, no platform from which to be eloquent, no audience to stir. and change by truths that he has found. And the burning compulsion that he's under to give discoveries form and to make them heard. Most of us have no continuous life in the theater, and it's a disgrace and a loss. But for those of us who have had productions in the respect of our peers, even we have never been truly or even moderately realized. They begin, those little people, to chip us down, to blur our edges, and resolve our dissonances, rechannel our extravagances, and confine our song before they even deign to put our work in rehearsal. And this should not be. They have the effrontery to think that we have much to learn. In all justice, those uncreative souls have the most to learn from us. This must not go on. A theater must be created to utilize people, not to maim them. Paul, this is to be a lyric theater. And if it is so truly, the stage hands will know it as well as the rest of us. The theater has nothing to do with Broadway. The Vine Theater is not even in the same field. So obviously there can be no competition and no comparison. We must never think of Broadway at all. So I returned to Santa Fe to close up the Asequa laundry. With Enrique gone, my old friends drifted back into my life with nothing more said. I had no work. I begged for writing jobs in LA. And the simple truth is that when I stated my willingness to go to work, there had been no job in Hollywood for me. But I had to do something, and I had to do it soon. I was tired of all the wolf bay. Anything I owned was for sale. I typed out this inventory of all of my belongings, which reads like an ad for a Taos trading post. Rustic pottery, a tin goose, a green Guadalupe, a little Mexican doll, a silver concho belt, an assortment of colorful Navajo blankets, the Crawford tea set, the Crawford camel hair throw, and the Crawford bar. I borrowed money, or tried to, from everyone. And you know, when Joan heard that I was struggling, she sent me $2,500. What a dame, what a doll, what a friend. I hope that Joan's fans understand just how loving and generous that she really is. So, I finished selling my house, and I had a little bit left over after paying my debts. Yet I was simply bursting with energy. I had so many plans for work. I never felt more ambitious or more competent. And then suddenly, we were at war. Drafted in 1942. I had been in the Army 10 months, making training films at Fort Ord. Collaborating with the choreographer Jose Limon, we created a poem to be sung and danced by soldiers. I teamed up with William Soroya to write a benefit, the Gay 90s. It was for the Soldiers Service Club. And I saw the world premiere of Oklahoma at the St. James Theater on opening night, March 31st, 1943. It was not sold out. As a technician third class, it was arranged for me to see it, along with rows of other men in uniform in seats that were especially reserved for all of us. And I was treated with great respect by all concerned. In the planning stages especially, even Oscar Hammerstein invited me to read an early draft. And I was generally pleased. I understood that we were not simply renaming Green Grow the Lilacs, which had been a play with old songs. I understood that the new songs were to be sewn into the fabric of the story, and that Aunt Eller and Laurie and Curly and Judd, no longer Jeter, would sing when, as we say in the theater, emotion became too great to speak. Before curtain grateful, the lighting was muted. I sat quietly in my seat and glanced around at the audience. The producers were there, along with Dick and Oscar, watching from the wings, from the balcony, trying to gauge the audience reaction. I probably could have joined them, but I elected not to. And they didn't press. In short, I was witnessing the jitters of any opening night. And so there I sat and tried very, very hard to be grateful and pleased that at last Green Grow the Lilacs was getting its due. My panic was palpable and conflicting. Was I worried more about success or failure? I admit to struggling with feelings of inadequacy, of having fallen short. I felt like a single mother who gives up her baby for adoption. In that terrible scene, watching through the window on Christmas Eve, only to see it thrive under the care of more prosperous and suitable parents. I studied the program, Oklahoma, emblazoned across its face. And under the title, right there, I traced the crawl based on the play Green Grow the Lilacs by Lynn. And it wouldn't matter how many people would call or write or yell across the restaurant, "Why was your name so small?" Or the fact that I was not included in the very first special Pulitzer Prize awarded to a Broadway musical. Or Oscar Hammerstein's very generous public entreaty that Lynn Riggs is the soul of Oklahoma. After many unfair rebukes from my friends who complained I've been given short shrift, in the end, it's a case of artistic quantum. How much of Oklahoma is truly me? That same old question. All of it. In Choctaw, Oklahoma means red people. I am Oklahoma, pure and simple. But in that moment, I didn't care. I don't care today. In the moments following the strains of "Oh, What a Beautiful Morning" and the thundering applause which erupted, I felt filled with Rose Eller's presence. Her fear of leaving me behind, which I had absorbed, which I had carried with me always, abated in that instant. I sensed her. I sensed her relief, her pride, and her joy, and her love for Raleigh me, her Cherokee son who brought Oklahoma to the world. Working on a letter to Maddie. Dear Maddie, there's something you can do for me. Indeed, no one else possibly could, and it's this. One of the quilts you made for me years ago is wearing out at the edges. Would it be too much to ask you to have a look at it and see what can be done? I love the quilt, and I hate like hell to see it go. If it's hopeless, I'll just go on using it till it falls apart. This is my favorite letter to my dad. Dear Dad, I hope you don't mind, but when I found out the schedule of Oklahoma's national tour, I had to act fast, hoping you'd be able to go. I want to pay for all the expenses, railroad fare, Pullmans, hotel bills, restaurants, and so forth. You can expect the theater tickets in about a week or 10 days. I do hope you can make it. I want very much for you all to see it. You might say that you are the father of the original author of Oklahoma, Lynn Riggs, and that you are making this special trip to see your son's show. Backstage, my dad, told all the dancers in Oklahoma that they wouldn't have jobs if it weren't for his son. Joe Minton continued to try to correspond with me through the years and even went to the trouble of tracking me down through my father when he didn't hear back. He wanted to return a box of letters and mementos that I'd left behind in my mother's basement those many years ago. Even after his note was forwarded to me, I put off responding. I knew which letters he was talking about. I finally felt so guilty that I wrote it back. Joe, if you knew how many times I think of you and wonder about you and am concerned about you, you who so little think harshly would even think less so. I think really you must know, for you have been so patient with me through the years. It just seems never since I saw you. It just seems never that we talked as you and I used to talk. And what's the good of saying I've done thus and so? It makes no sense. Even if I told you I finished a play, and for the second time in my life, felt I had gone so far astray in it that the sky was down to a foot above my head. It makes no sense that at a harassed and difficult time in my life, I wrote at least a dozen of the best poems I've ever written. I'm working again, I swim every day, I burn with new projects, and I live. What more can I tell you? I do wish I could see you, Joe. Do you ever come east? This is a salutation and an apology and an affectionate greeting. Burn the letters, Joe. These things of mine sometimes send them. And then today, I received this little box. Dear Rolo, as you suggest, today I'm mailing you this small box of old-time belongings of yours. When I sold the place after Mama's death, I brought them here. And since then, they've been in the chest of drawers alongside the box containing my dress studs. They are, of course, of no value, save that of memory. Lynn, I often think of what my father once said about you, that your plays were passable, but your poems outstanding. To this remark, I too agree. Do you ever write poems anymore? Now I know that they are not fashionable, but they alone show the real you. Your plays, even the successful ones, are not the real you, as you will agree. If you like, turn back to your true love for a time and see if the muse cannot be courted once more. It would be worth a try, don't you believe? Best old-time greetings from Joe. P.S. Remember this poem? You wrote this for me the day I left Norman to study in France. Now you are gone. The curving lines of steel slash like a knife the dim fields of the world. Soon will the salt breeze, where the seagulls wheel, smart in your nostrils, and the flag unfurls. Stream its gay pennant through the sunlit days, and you will lean into the morning sun, wistful perhaps, but with your steady gaze. Dissolving phantom mist that night has spun, you will come back with laughter on your lips, and strange your cargoes, pent within your eyes, the swirl of rain, the wine-red sky and ship, more beautiful than dreams of paradise. You will come striding through the early dew, jubilant and happy as the boy we knew.
With real reluctance, I reapproach you.
consider it unimportant or too precious or unrelated to the present world, nor do I imagine it to be a recluse art, one for the study only, nor that I think its special qualities are too delicate to compete with the sizzling violences of our time. On the contrary, I consider poetry to be completely important, more related to the modern world than any of the arts, not recluse at all, but a thing for the communication of man with man. I'm going to say a few words on the poetry of theater. The American stage has come to a strange place. There was a time when every stage in the land was full of romantic fables, sugary versions of man and woman who, darkly through treachery and vicissitudes of every description, found each other at last and sank into their haven of delight, living happily ever after. The man was strong and brave. The woman was sweet and given to fainting spells. Both were excessively pure. These plays having little, practically nothing to do with life, vanished from the boards. Then the problem play arrived. A practically insoluble personal or social predicament was settled in Act 3 by a playwright who, acting the part of God, took the right strings. New people walked on stage. The man of the docks, of the fields, in offices, madmen, quaint characters, and frivolous women. The American stage began to experiment not only in realism, but beyond realism. Theater imported from Russia, through Germany, Impressionism, Expressionism. As we came to the year 1930, the talkies began to supplant the stage in what it was doing best. It was easier to do on the screen the plays, which were the very flower of the American theater. So the American stage began to look around for other things to do. It's still looking. The American theater, for all its vitality and real attempt to confront life, can only hope for a future when enough theatrical guile has passed under its own bridges before it can so completely dictate the terms under which it will operate. The American stage, it seems to me, must become a platform for fervor, for eloquence, for a blinding revelation of man. It must be more than entertainment, more than life, more than ritual, more than color, glamour. It must touch and illuminate the spirit of the striving man. It must believe in the Word, which is God. That's the theater I believe in. That's the theater I intend to spend my life in.
Rebel, doggy. It's okay. It's okay, doggy. It's okay. I am not a man who can live with anybody. Learn this. It's incredible to me that nothing is happening. But perhaps it is beyond my knowing. It's as if everything were in abeyance, awaiting a call from what? From whom? After I came home, I was quite sick, quite desperate, and not in alliance. And in a notebook, I finalized some of the things troubling me about myself. After the storm of yesterday, today is an immaculate wash day. I must try to start another project for I only seem to live at such times. I must go to the beach at 4 and have a swim. I must do this every day there is sun. I know it is good for me. Vivid dreams last night, but of course they are gone now. I do remember in one, I came out onto a balcony which had a stair, and 2 gunmen came and asked me for my money. I was able to dream back to my coming onto the balcony and hiding the money in my shoe, and then go on with the moment of the stick-up. I remember wondering if the money would disintegrate in the wet, for it was raining. Still, the somber, cloudy days are with us. Last night, pure hell, hard to breathe, those damn stomach pains. I must isolate the thoughts that bring them on. Last night at the beginning of the attacks, I looked at what I had been thinking, but I couldn't put down what they were. If I could chart them and give them a name, perhaps I can change my thinking. This is the second day of mental prayer. By thinking correctly, I found some moments of illumination. It is going to take time, but perhaps God is showing me the way at last. It's okay, Rebel. It's okay, doggy. It's gonna be okay. Tell me it's gonna be okay. People always asking me about Oklahoma. The state, not the musical. Sometimes they say, I know a lot about Oklahoma from your plays. They make me feel at ease. The range of life there is not to be indicated, much less its meaning laid bare by a few people in a few plays. Someday, perhaps all of the plays that I've written, taken together, might constitute a study from which certain things might be formulated into a kind of truth about people who happen to live in Oklahoma, as opposed to, South Dakota. But not now. The secret is scattered too widely. And what's worse, hid away in the breasts of too many people, united in a desperate concealment. The beats of their hearts are mysterious and faint. No pressure of hand or open vein may teach much about this guarded flow. But I have felt a great deal about it. And I know that which makes them a little special, a little distinct in the Middle West is the quality of their taciturnity. They are voiceless, tongueless. They answer the challenging, who goes there? Only by a flash of lantern, so quick, so momentary, that none but the acute guard sees more than a shadowing figure retreating into the darkness. The people who settled Oklahoma were a suspect fraternity, as fearful of being recognized by others as they were by themselves. Gamblers, traitors, vagabonds, adventurers, daredevils, fools, men with sickness, men with distemper, men disdainful of the settled or the admired, the regular way of life. Men on the move, men fleeing from a critical world and their own eyes. Pioneers, eaten people. And their descendants have the same things in them. Changed a little, grown out a bit, but they are there just the same. And so they speak. Speech reveals one, and it's better to say nothing. And so these people, who have been much admired and much maligned, have been not quite known. A shifting fringe of dark around the campfire, where wolves, perhaps, and unnameable things lurked. I happened to be born
myself just outside the rush of light. And I know how it feels. And I think how those others felt. And it seems to me that if there was much ignorance in these people, there was also a minor wisdom. If there was much cruelty and darkness, there was also gentleness and the singing of old songs. These people, human, were victims of special and touching disinclination and even inability to publish their humanity. That's what I'm trying to do for them. And for their descendants. Falteringly, imperfectly, incompletely in the place. Now that I've said all this, it all sounds very pretentious and just wrong. It's better for me to say nothing. I'm coming to believe, except in poetry and drama. I'm tired of the endless need to keep working. I'm saddened when I'm sickened by the world state. As who isn't? Bad times, hombre. Anyway, I'm not always cast into fits. There are jokes to crack, lifting things still. Actually, I've done little in my life except try to discover who I am and what my relation to the world is. In the world, I have never really felt at home. How can anyone feel at home in a world with unparalleled cruelty? A world aching with hunger and despair? Can one be at peace with the social, economic, and political organization of the world that makes man fear living, hate his neighbor, revile the sources of his being, and boast of an allegiance to violence and destruction? I don't think so. And turning from the consideration of the outer world in dismay, I look at myself. And what do I see? Weakness, lack of discipline, feeble attempts at understanding, ignorance, vanity, waywardness, and conceit. I find, however, 5 working senses. And by great good luck, I am able to see that these are tools that can perhaps be made to work for good instead of evil. If I can use them enough, truthfully, they may relate things to me that will give me strength and hope to go when I find myself in the world impossible. I am lucky. If I make declarations strong enough through work or through living, others too may find the way less hard. As old Aunt Eller used to say, oh, lots of things happen to folks. Sickness, being poor, hungry even, being left alone in your old age, being afraid to die. It all adds up. That's the way life is, cradle to the grave. And you can stand it. There's only one way. You got to be hardy. Got to be. Babies, I have a nasty, vicious tumor. Man you up. I'm gonna sneak out. Would you let Rebel out for me, please? He'll need to go pee. Give him the contents of his yummy box. Tell him he'll be back. Go to bed. Whether he's welcome or not, a writer needs to come home to his farmhouse. The he refers to me, who, in case you didn't know it, is God.
Gregory, if you'd like to join us over here and sit in the office chair, I'll pull up a bar stool as I usually do in the rainbow room. And we're kind of open for questions here. This is a new work, world premiere, if you will. And we'd like to get your feedback and what you thought of the play. Gregory, do you have any comments to open with?
Thank you so much. And thank you for bringing this alive. There's so many people to thank in the room. But I just am struck mostly by how relevant Lynn's words are today. The last scene could be written about what we heard in the news today. And so it comes around, and I just am so incredibly touched by how good Oklahoma has been to me. And you know, we all have these opinions about other places. I'm from Los Angeles. People have opinions about that. People have opinions about Tulsa in the news all these past months. And it's just, we just all have to get to know each other. So any ideas, any thoughts you have, I'd love to hear them.
We can't see. That light's directly in my eye on. I can see.
Now you know how
any
it
questions.
feels.
Oh, I see one. Don, back there.
I just want to thank you for writing this.
Yeah.
Thank you for bringing it here.
So just absolutely my very, very great luck and pleasure. Thank you.
You know, as with any new work, everybody, and George, you're there, and Don, you know, Michelle, you know, with any new work, you go through a script, and you go through another script, and another script, and it finally comes together. And, you know, this process has gone, what, 18 months now, or is it a little over a year?
A little over a year.
Yeah.
And initially, I thought that it would just it would be like a verbatim play, and we just organize all of Lynn's speeches into one continuous thing, and that proved a little difficult. And our friend Michelle said, "No, use your own voice, trust that." And so I took that journey and was able to expand it into what we see today. But there was so much really great source material. We had access to all of Lynn's letters from multiple special collections libraries like Yale and Harvard, and of course University of Oklahoma Western Collections, and locally here at the University of Tulsa special collections at the McFarland Library, and it just was so rich. And there's a point where you go, well, Lynn can say it better. Let's just let Lynn say it. So as you know, the film is compartmentalized into, as Russ knows well, into different speeches, and so you just needed to kind of marry them all together to making it, you know, him telling us what his life has been. But I just been so touched by how far many of us, whatever our persuasions are, but me as a gay man, I was born on northeastern plains of Montana on a reservation called Fort Peck, and Lynn was born in Indian Territory, and we both leave those places, and we travel so far into, you know, cities and do interesting things, creative things, and I just have been struck by how what we end up with, you know, like what is around Lynn on what's close to the last day of his life, what survived his childhood, what talismans, you know, do we take with us? And that would be, you know, Maddie's quilt and the old photos, and just kind of that you know, 'cause, the point is, we leave home, but we always want to come home.
And that's one of the things, you know, we're extremely grateful to the Claremore Museum. The photos that you see here, the Joan Crawford photo and Betty Davis and John over there, and these all were from copies from the archives that they've assembled over at the Claremore Museum of History and Rick's collection over there. And we're so grateful for them to, and even the self-portrait here, and this one came from Gilcrease. More Sky. It's a Jacobson print. It came from Gilcrease. And, it's all about Oklahoma. It's all home. And talking about the quilt, and I'll interject here. He carried the quilt with him throughout his life. I mean, he always carried Manny's quilt. So when we were doing the research for this, I sent out a Facebook request to some of my quilter friends. And, through one link or another, they sent pictures of what they had. But we ended up pulling this one out of our closet. My husband John's grandmother's. And hold it up for just a second. And you may not understand, those quilters of you who understand, this is a bow tie pattern. If you see all the bow ties. So we were considering all this. I was over at Russ's house one day for a rehearsal, and we were talking about the quilt and what it meant. And all of a sudden it just hit me in the face. The bow tie pattern. Lynn preferred bow ties rather than jeans and chaps. And Joan Crawford got it. and Maddie got it. His own sister knew. They knew he was gay, okay? But that's the symbolism that and these things only happen. I don't know what the other production company's going to do with this play if they can't find a bow tie quilt. Maybe they can whip with this and I'll charge a high price. But anyway, we're extremely grateful to the Claremore Museum for providing us with all this wonderful, wonderful research that we've had here. Russ, do you have some comments tonight?
Well, I just want to say that throughout this whole process, I have felt as though Lynn was rooting for us and guiding us, I think, in ways that are unsuspecting. I feel like that the way that he felt his mother's presence at the premiere of Oklahoma, I feel him here. I have felt him throughout the whole process. We're in the Lynn Riggs Theater, so I feel as though, we have come together to tell his story, and I just couldn't be more honored to perform this role. I relate a lot to Lynn. I'm a playwright as well, and mixed blood heritage, and have faced a lot of the similar kinds of challenges that Lynn faced as a writer. And so I felt such a kinship to him even before this project ever came along. And when it did come along, it was so natural. And it was not even like a question, right? It was just like, okay, so we need to do this. And here we are.
From the day one, I called him and I said, "You've been referred to me, and would you like to do this role? May I send you the script?" So we Zoomed 2 days later, and he said, "I haven't read it once, I've read it twice. And by the way, I know this about Lynn, and I've done this." And it was just an immediate relationship that we established here. So, yeah. It was just kind of kissing.
I was wondering if I could ask Toby to shine a light on what the significance of More Sky coming to the Lynn Riggs Theater this weekend is.
Sure. I remember, Dr. Hinton, you had come to the Gilcrease they brought you in to lecture us on the gay cowboy, and we had you at the Gilcrease Museum, and we were there in the Vista Ballroom, and you were talking about the Western manly man and the gay cowboy and all of that. And then you said, now most of you probably don't even know this, and then you just mentioned to that room full of folks about Lynn Riggs and his tie to the Western culture. And so I stood up and hollered from the back of the room. I said, "We know about him. We've got a theater named after him." And I don't know if you remember that.
I do,
and
yes.
so Dennis and I, now this was Dennis's dream, and this was, he founded our organization over 40 years ago, he and his friends, and some of those friends are even here tonight. And for 40 years, we've stayed in Oklahoma, Dennis, when it would have been really easy to run to the West Coast or the East Coast, or to move to more hospitable, welcoming, warmer places that would have been easier for all of us. And so it was Dennis's dream that we have a theater and that he wanted it named after Lynn Riggs, because every year we have around about 2,900 people who tour the center, and most usually they're college groups and university groups, and we wanted to make sure they knew all of Oklahoma's story and how embedded Lynn Riggs and how important his part of it is to the story of Oklahoma that many times is ignored and shut out. I am thrilled with this production tonight that you told his whole story. You didn't hide it, you didn't slide away or whisper about it. It was there beautifully said, so beautifully, and so many thoughts that many of us in this room felt growing up here. We spent years trying to raise money to do all of these renovations, and then Dennis has made sure that this theater, a lot of encouragement from Pat and Michelle and other theater folks who said, this is what you need to do to make this space be able to tell the story. Sometimes stories that aren't told, or they're silenced, or they can't find welcome, inclusive spaces. So that was the vision of us having a theater and this big old LGBT center in the middle of the heartland. I mean, really, you know, we're considered the French Foreign Legion outpost. Greg has told us hints about people are surprised that he found all of us out here in the middle of Oklahoma. But it's because Lynn made sure that our story was told. And so July 17th of last year, you know, we had the space. Michelle and Pat and all them made sure that everything in this space was top notch so we could do good theater. And we had to have a mural. And so that was a lot of work, wasn't it? A lot of back and forth. And we got that out there. And then last July, on the 17th of July, somebody defaced it and vandalized it. And all of a sudden, that act of vandalism made everybody in the country know about Lynn Riggs. Even the mayor of Tulsa changed his image to that mural. It took almost a year for it to be restored, and we had to spend a lot of money to seal it and protect it in the event that it's ever vandalized again.
So let's continue. And 2 days ago,
I'm
sorry.
I'm building up. I don't need help telling a story. And a month ago, a city councilor who we work very closely, who has a passion for theater, she decided it was time for Tulsa to have a hate crimes ordinance, and she introduced it and pushed it through. And every TV interview, every story were the images of this mural being vandalized. And on Wednesday, the city council in Tulsa, Oklahoma, approved a hate crimes ordinance unanimously so that there be protections in place for people like Lynn and all of his tribe that are staying here in Oklahoma. Thank you, Dr. Hinton, for making this story. Russ, incredible, absolutely incredible. Pat, Michelle, and Ann, and all you folks who worked on this, just 10 times better than I could have hoped tonight have been. It's so powerful. I'm so glad that it's been on Facebook tonight.
Michelle?
Two things. Pat and Russ, Pat, thank you for having an Indigenous artist play an Indigenous artist. representation matters.
Yes, it does.
It does. And then for Gregory, just curious, now that you've seen it up on its feet, is the play, as Ethel Merman said, call me Miss Birdseye of 1932, this thing is frozen. So is this the play, or do you see any rewrites? And then what's next for the play?
Well, I think that we didn't really get to workshop it. I mean, we workshopped it with you, of course, and I couldn't be present here while Russ and Pat went through the reading to hear it. This is the first time I've heard it other than myself, and so the normal process is we make changes as that happens. But I trusted the script that we had, because I'd read it I was invited to do a playwrights reading at the Kennedy Center American College Theater Festival, the Northwest region, last February, and I read it, and I got a really wonderful reaction. And I should say, because they heard about Lynn Riggs up there, they're now naming their Indigenous Playwriting Award the Lynn Riggs. So I feel that it's all there, but it needs to be trimmed down, of course. Russ and I were discussing this earlier today, and we talked about this, Michelle. That we had this plan. I had this notion. This was when Oklahoma was going to start touring the country, and it was going to commence, down in Oklahoma City. And I always wanted. I thought how great it would be if More Sky could follow Oklahoma around the country and be presented as a smaller production, or a historical lecture, in some way, and so that people could really learn about Lynn, who was the original author of Oklahoma. So I had plans, and I live in Los Angeles, in Hollywood, and was going to come to the Dolby Theater about this time, which is about 2 blocks away from where I live. So I go to Oklahoma, and then Oklahoma's going to come. So I was just trying to map out how we could place it in community theaters, in each city, or possibly I have this idea that maybe we could do the show on a darkened set of Oklahoma some afternoon, but everybody said the teams would go crazy. But the plan was to follow it around, follow the tour of Oklahoma, and so that's one idea. And then we have already interest from the Autry Museum in Los Angeles. I got my start doing Out West with the Autry, and Rick West, who is the chairman of the Autry, and who is from Oklahoma, and who founded. Russ can tell us about it.
The National Museum of the American Indian.
At Smithsonian. So Russ worked with Rick, and Rick was just thrilled to hear that Russ and I know each other and are doing this. So he's interested. The Smithsonian is interested in possibly doing a program. So I envision possibly a museum. I like to work with museums. Museums have frustrated production managers who want to put on a show, and if you get to do it in a gallery, you automatically have a $2 million set. And I've been very fortunate that that's happened. So hopefully there's a network there. There's also, Russ would speak more to this, they're Native American theatrical organizations, and like Native Voices at the Autry, where it could go in that circuit. So and at the end of it, if it's just an actor, preferably Russ, on a stage with nothing, interpreting Lynn, it's as a solo plays are very desirable now because they're easy to mount, and what I think is compelling, and hopefully the words are compelling, but the fact that an actor, one single person, can pull it off is like really a joy to behold when it's done as well as the rest of the cast. Thank you.
Don, I think you have a question.
Dr. Hinton, what led you to choose Lynn Riggs as a subject?
I should say I'm really not a doctor.
Oh, sorry.
But thank you, Toby.
I just
Thank you for that.
You are now.
The doctor is in. No. I met Lynn Riggs on the front page of the New York Times when they were covering the revival of Oklahoma by Daniel Fish in 2018, and that was at the same time I was coming to the Gilcrease. And there was a quote, kind of a muddled quote attributed to Stephen Sondheim, that because Lynn was underscored as being the forgotten gay cowboy that originated in Oklahoma, and Sondheim said something about the rural longing of the gay cowboy, and that was kind of my specialty. So I was coming to the Gilcrease to do some research and do this talk, and I go, oh, I could just go with Claremore. That's probably some way far away, and I looked, and it's like 40 miles away or whatever. So they gave me a car, and I drove right the hell over to Claremore, and I went to the Claremore Museum of History, and I met Andy Couch, who's the most wonderful, dedicated curator and a true Lynn Riggs scholar. They call him a Riggs head, I guess. And I just was, smitten. And he fell perfectly in line with what I was doing with Out West, shining a light on this forgotten person. And I think Lynn is going to be the most forgotten person that
Well, and as Russ mentioned, kind of made what am I trying to say? He told James Watts, he said, I think he deserves the posthumous Pulitzer. And that's what we're working on. That's what we're working on.
Yes. He does, don't you think? Don't you agree?
I mean, if Rogers and Hammerstein got it,
Right.
and his work was 50%, why doesn't he deserve a posthumous?
Yeah, and why didn't he get it originally?
Yeah.
You know what I mean? We want to know why.
Insert the hashtag. Hashtag, thank you. Anybody else out there?
Sure. I would just like to say personally thank you for bringing this, and it's not something I've really ever experienced or participated in this type of setting. I just was immersed in it with your presentation, and just want to say thank you for the opportunity to participate in it and be a part of it. It's fantastic. Thank you.
Great, thank you.
I hope we kept the dress
Oh,
form
yeah.
out.
Yeah, you did a good job there.
Well, I want to put this blanket on you, Greg.
Oh.
So this is how we do it in Indian country when we want to honor somebody.
I hope somebody's getting a picture, please. Somebody get their camera out. All right. Well, thank everybody for coming tonight. We certainly appreciate your patronage, and keep good thoughts. Hashtag.
We need to get